phone's shrill ring tore through the quiet of my apartment, a sound I'd later recognize as the starter's pistol for the worst race of my life. It was Mrs. Henderson, our neighbor, her voice frayed with a panic that immediately set my own heart thundering. "Clara, it's your father. You need to come right now. He's not himself." I didn't grab a coat or my purse, just fled out the door into the chilly evening, my car keys digging into my clenched fist. The 10-minute drive was a nightmare of blurred streetlights and terrifying possibilities, each red light feeling like a personal affront. I found him there, in the middle of our quiet suburban street, a tragic figure under the amber glow of a lone street lamp. He was dressed in his finest suit, the one he'd worn to my college graduation, but his feet were bare and dirty against the cold asphalt. "The board is waiting, Clarabelle," he murmured, his eyes clouded with a foggy confusion that made my breath catch. He was searching for quarterly reports from a company that had dissolved a decade ago. Leading him back inside, my hand trembling on his arm, I felt the first true fissure of fear. This was beyond forgotten anniversaries or misplaced glasses. This was a fundamental crumbling of the brilliant, accomplished man I called Dad. The daughter who had stayed close now stood as the sole, terrified witness to his silent unraveling, the weight of this new reality settling on my shoulders with the force of a physical blow. The neurologist's office was a temple of bad news, its sterile silence broken only by the soft hum of the computer and the crushing weight of Dr. Evans's words. "Vascular dementia," he announced, his pointer tapping against MRI scans that looked like a starry night of permanent, damaging scars. "It's a progressive condition. We can manage some symptoms, but the decline is inevitable." He handed me pamphlets for support groups and glossy brochures for memory care facilities, their smiling, serene seniors a grotesque parody of the confused, frightened man sitting beside me. My father, Albert, offered the doctor a faint, polite smile, completely unaware that his future, his very mind, was being systematically dismantled in this cold, clinical room. That night, surrounded by the comforting familiarity of my own kitchen, I called my sister, Isabelle. The phone rang 4 times before she answered, the sound of clinking glasses and sophisticated laughter, a stark contrast to my tear-stained silence. "Clara, this isn't a good time." I choked out the diagnosis, the words progressive and no cure sticking like shards of glass in my throat. A long, static-filled pause followed. "Look, you're the one who's there," she finally said, her voice clipped and dismissive. "Just handle it. And whatever you do, don't you dare stick him in some depressing home. It would absolutely destroy him." The line went dead, leaving me standing alone, the immense, isolating burden of handling it now mine to carry, a crushing weight bestowed with breathtaking casualness. In the chaotic, soul-devouring weeks that followed the diagnosis, a single memory surfaced, a life raft tossed into my churning sea of despair. Years ago, when Dad's mind was still a sharp, brilliant tool, he'd insisted we visit a lawyer. "For clarity, Clarabelle," he'd said, his hand warm and reassuring on my shoulder. "A smart man plans for the unexpected, and I need to know you'll be taken care of." I remembered signing a thick stack of documents, the lawyer patiently explaining something called a durable power of attorney, its clauses robust and far-reaching. With a frantic, desperate energy born of pure survival instinct, I tore through his home office, my hands shaking as I yanked open filing cabinet drawers, sending old tax returns and manuals scattering. And there it was, tucked away in a forgotten dark green folder, the documents. The paper was crisp, the legal language dense and powerful, my name emblazoned throughout as agent. It granted me absolute authority over his healthcare, his finances, his property, his entire world. "You're my voice," he had told me that day, his eyes clear and full of trust. I had filed it away, a relic of a precaution I never thought I'd need. Now, holding it, the pages feeling both heavy and light, I felt the first true spark of agency ignite in the overwhelming darkness. This was the shield he had forged for me, for a battle he must have feared was coming. Isabelle's arrival was announced not with a sisterly conversation, but with a single, terse text message that felt like a declaration of war. "Flying in tomorrow. We need to talk about Dad's future." She swept into the house like a toxic fog, a whirlwind of oppressive, expensive perfume and sleek designer luggage that seemed to mock the worn, comfortable familiarity of our family home. For 3 long days, she conducted a subtle, insidious campaign of psychological warfare, her presence a constant, unsettling hum in the background. I would walk into a room and she would instantly fall silent, a brittle, patently fake smile plastered on her face that never reached her cold eyes. I overheard her in his study, her voice a low, persuasive murmur dripping with false concern. "You know Clara has never been good with money, Dad. She's far too emotional for these big decisions. You need to be smart to protect your assets, your legacy, from well-meaning mismanagement." When I tried to join them, to break their conspiratorial bubble, she would deftly change the subject, her laughter ringing through the house, a hollow, forced sound that made my skin crawl. She was systematically, deliberately poisoning his vulnerable mind, twisting his deep love for me into something ugly and suspicious. The home that had always been my sanctuary now felt like a gilded cage, and I was trapped inside, watching in helpless horror as my sister manipulated the father we both professed to love. The changes in my father were not sudden, but a series of subtle, terrifying tremors that signaled the coming earthquake. He'd look at me over our morning coffee, his kind, familiar eyes now narrowed with an uncharacteristic, gut-wrenching suspicion. "Isabelle says you're thinking of selling the house," he'd say, his voice wavering with a doubt that felt like a physical wound. "Is that true, Clarabelle? You wouldn't do that, would you?" My reassurances felt feeble and transparent, worthless currency against the constant, poisonous whispers she had planted in the fertile soil of his failing memory. He began hiding his checkbook, a paranoid gesture he had never in his entire principled life even considered. Once, I discovered him on the phone, attempting to wire a substantial sum of money to a fake investment firm he'd seen on a daytime television ad, utterly convinced it was the responsible thing Isabelle had so vehemently urged him to do. The unwavering trust that had been the bedrock of our relationship for 30 years was being systematically, grain by grain, eroded away. I felt like I was desperately trying to hold water in my hands, watching in helpless agony as the man I knew and adored slipped through my fingers, replaced by a paranoid, fearful stranger who saw me not as his protector, but as a dire threat to his security. The emotional whiplash was a constant, exhausting torture, a relentless cycle of heartbreak and simmering, impotent fury. The official letter arrived on a Monday, its thick, expensive linen paper and formal, embossed logo sending an immediate, primal chill of dread down my spine. It was from a law firm I had never heard of, Sterling and Hart. The language was cold, precise, and meticulously crafted to devastate. It stated that Albert, deemed of sound mind by a doctor I'd never met, had executed a new last will and testament along with a deed of gift, transferring the sole ownership of the family home, the house I lived in, the sacred repository of all our cherished memories, to my sister, Isabelle. I, his primary caretaker and devoted daughter, was effectively, completely, and coldly disinherited. The world tilted on its axis, the familiar kitchen swimming nauseatingly before my eyes. I read the words again and again, my breath catching in a tight, painful knot in my throat, each syllable a fresh, brutal betrayal. The house wasn't just an asset, it was my home, my stability, my last tangible connection to the father I was losing day by painful day. I collapsed into a kitchen chair, the heavy final paper slipping from my numb fingers. This was Isabelle's master stroke, her final, calculated move in a game I never knew we were playing. She hadn't just stolen an inheritance, she had stolen my past, my present, and my future in one cold, brutal, impeccably legal maneuver. My confrontation with Isabelle was a short, brutal, and utterly soul-crushing phone call that stripped away any last pretense of sisterly bond. Her voice was glacial, dripping with a triumph she didn't even bother to conceal. "He knows I'm the responsible one, Clara. It's that simple. He didn't want a mere caretaker inheriting his life's work. He wanted it all to be in the hands of someone who truly understands its value, its potential." She had taken deliberate, cruel advantage of his fading memory, his growing, nameless fears, and his enduring love to completely rewrite our family history, casting herself as the savvy, clear-eyed savior, and me as the incompetent, emotionally unstable villain. I hung up, my entire body trembling with a rage so pure and blinding it stole my breath and made my vision swim. I felt utterly, completely defeated, the floor falling out from under me. The cost of a legal challenge was astronomical, a brutal, public, and drawn-out probate battle I could never hope to afford, a war of attrition designed for people like her, not for people like me. I slid to the floor of my home, his home, and sobbed, great heaving sobs that racked my entire body, the weight of her betrayal and the crushing, absolute injustice pressing me physically into the ground. It felt like I was losing him all over again. But this time, the profound, gut-wrenching loss was accompanied by the cruelest, most vicious theft imaginable. In a haze of grief and utter paralyzing desperation, I was finally forced to organize Dad's medical records for a new specialist, a task that felt both futile and essential. My movements were robotic, my mind numb with a pain so profound it felt terminal. As I pulled a thick, well-worn file from the bottom drawer of his old oak desk, my fingers brushed against a different, older folder tucked secretly behind it, hidden from casual view. It was the dark green one from our original, kind-eyed family lawyer, Mr. Davies. I had completely forgotten about its existence in the initial panicked aftermath of the diagnosis and the ensuing legal nightmare. With a heart suddenly thumping wildly, erratically against my ribs, I carefully pulled it out. There they were, the durable power of attorney documents. But this set was far more comprehensive, more robust, and more powerfully worded than I had ever remembered. It included specific ironclad clauses about financial exploitation and explicitly granted the power to nullify any transactions made while the principal was incapacitated. It wasn't just a document, it was a legal fortress, a citadel of protection my father had meticulously constructed for this exact, unthinkable scenario. A single, powerful, electrifying thought cut through the thick, suffocating fog of my despair. She doesn't know. Isabelle, in her arrogant, hasty greed, had no idea this nuclear weapon existed. The spark of hope I felt was no longer a feeble flicker. It was a roaring, determined, all-consuming flame. Sitting in Mr. Davies's familiar, wood-paneled office, surrounded by the comforting scent of old leather-bound books and lemon polish, felt like stepping into a fortified sanctuary after a long, brutal war. He was older now, his hair a distinguished silver, but his eyes were as sharp, intelligent, and fiercely protective as ever. He read Isabelle's documents with a deepening, thunderous frown, his lips pressed into a thin, angry line of pure disapproval. "This is a textbook case of undue influence, Clara," he said, his voice low and steady, yet vibrating with a controlled, professional fury. "It's egregious. But with your power of attorney, we don't just challenge this. We obliterate it. We reduce it to dust." He explained that the moment Dad was medically deemed incapacitated, a status his primary doctor would readily and unequivocally confirm in a sworn affidavit, his legal capacity to sign those documents vanished, rendering them legally null and void from the moment the pen touched the paper. "The law is squarely, unambiguously on your side," Mr. Davies said, leaning forward, his gaze intense and reassuring. "She has committed fraud. This isn't just a civil matter anymore. It's potentially criminal, and the district attorney would be very interested." The feeling of powerlessness that had consumed me for months began to recede, like a toxic tide pulling back, replaced by a cold, clear, and terrifyingly focused resolve. The battle was far from over, but for the first time I had a general, an army, and the high ground. A plan began to form in my mind, not in a flash of inspiration, but as a cold, precise, and utterly ruthless strategy unfolding with glacial certainty. Simply reversing the property transfer felt insufficient, a mere slap on the wrist that would only teach her to be more careful next time. It would be a temporary, logistical setback for Isabelle, who would slink away with her tail between her legs, unpunished in any meaningful way, and likely to scheme again another day, in a different manner. No, I needed her to understand in her bones the true, grinding, soul-destroying weight of the responsibility she had so callously dismissed and used as a weapon against me. She didn't want the care, the mess, the emotional toll. She wanted the clean, cold asset, the money, the unearned prize. My revenge, I decided with a chilling clarity, would be to give her exactly what she had pretended to want. Full, unadulterated, crushing, inescapable responsibility. I would use the power my father had so wisely and presciently given me, not for my own financial gain, but to teach my sister a lesson in empathy, consequence, and sheer exhausting reality that she would never ever forget. It was a dangerous, emotionally fraught, and morally complex gamble, but the fire of injustice burned too hot and too deep within me to consider a more peaceful, forgiving path. My first move was silent, strategic, and designed to surgically cut off her every possible avenue of attack and retreat. Using the absolute, unassailable authority granted by the power of attorney, I immediately contacted Dad's bank, his brokerage firm, and every other financial institution he had ever used. I provided them with the legal documentation and a formal, devastatingly clear letter from Dr. Evans confirming his legal incapacity. Every single account was frozen instantly, a digital fortress wall slamming down, cutting off any financial access Isabelle might have had or planned to use for her own ends. I then had Mr. Davies send a formal, legally scorching 10-page letter to her lawyer at Sterling and Hart. It cited the power of attorney, detailed the overwhelming, damning evidence of undue influence, and declared all recent transactions void ab initio from the beginning. It also contained a not-so-subtle menacing hint about impending criminal charges of elder abuse and fraud, listing specific statutes. The shockwave had been initiated silently, a deep subterranean tremor she wouldn't feel until the very ground opened up beneath her perfectly manicured feet. I was no longer the passive victim waiting for the next blow. I was the architect, the engineer, the general of the counterattack, and the blueprint was written in the unyielding language of the law. Isabelle's response was a furious, screaming, nearly incoherent phone call that I let go to voicemail. A decision that felt both strategic and deeply satisfying. "You conniving bitch," she shrieked, her voice distorted by a rage so pure it was almost fascinating. "You're stealing from me! That's my house! I'll ruin you, I'll take you for everything you have. You have no idea who you're messing with." I listened to the message once, a cold, grim smile touching my lips, then saved it meticulously. It was a perfect, pristine digital recording of her true, venomous, and entitled character, a gift she had handed me. When she finally managed to get me on the line, her voice was pure, undiluted venom, each word a poisoned dart. "You can't do this. You have no right. I'll have you in jail for this." I waited patiently on the line, saying nothing, letting the silence amplify her fury, until her screaming tirade finally subsided into ragged, furious, impotent breaths. "It's already done, Isabelle," I said, my voice dangerously, unnervingly calm, a flat lake over a raging underwater current. "The only one who has stolen anything here is you. You tried to steal a home, and you tried to steal a father. And this," I paused, letting the silence hang between us thick and heavy with threat, "is only the very beginning." I hung up softly, the click of the receiver a period at the end of her sentence, my heart pounding not with fear, but with a grim, dark, and patient sense of anticipation. The trap was now meticulously set, and she was walking right into it. I presented my final, non-negotiable ultimatum in a formal, tense meeting at Mr. Davies's imposing office, with him sitting sternly and imposingly by my side, a silent pillar of legal might. Isabelle arrived, her face a frozen mask of contempt and simmering, barely contained fury, her designer outfit a stark declaration of war against the room's sober tradition. I laid out the facts coldly, without a single trace of emotion, my voice flat and judicial. I explained that I would not be contesting the will for my own financial gain or for the house. Instead, I was invoking my full, legally incontestable power as his agent to appoint a primary, live-in caregiver for our father. "Given your repeatedly expressed, deep concern for his well-being and your stated, forceful desire to personally manage his legacy," I said, my voice as steady and cold as polished ice, "I have decided to appoint you, Isabelle, as his full-time, live-in caregiver, effective immediately. You will move in today." Her face underwent a dramatic, almost theatrical transformation, shifting from sheer, incandescent fury to pure, unadulterated, wide-eyed horror. "You can't be serious." She spat, her composure shattering into 1,000 pieces, her voice rising to a hysterical pitch. "I'm not a nurse. I have a career, a life, a conference in Geneva next week." Her refusal was instantaneous, explosive, laced with a venom that seemed to poison the very air in the dignified wood-paneled room. "This is absolutely ridiculous. This is extortion. It's kidnapping. I'll call the police," she shouted, her voice screeching, her hands gripping the edge of the table as if she might overturn it. I didn't flinch. I didn't blink. I didn't move a muscle. I simply slid a single damning document across the polished surface of the mahogany table. It was a draft lawsuit, meticulously detailed and horrifying in its scope, outlining specific allegations of elder abuse, fraud, and undue influence, complete with sworn notarized statements from his doctor, from our neighbor Mrs. Henderson, and from a forensic financial analyst about the suspicious, predatory timing of the property transfer. "Your choice, Isabelle," I said, my gaze unwavering, locking with her terrified, frantic eyes. "You can step up and be the responsible daughter you so convincingly claim to be in that new will, or you can be a named defendant in a very public, very damaging, and very, very winnable criminal case. The evidence, as you can see, is all right here." I watched, a cold, dark satisfaction settling in my chest, as the color completely drained from her face, leaving a ghostly, terrified pallor, while she scanned the devastating, life-ruining document. For the very first time in her entitled, charmed life, Isabelle was truly, utterly, and inescapably cornered by the law. The silence in the room was absolute, profound, and utterly victorious. Trapped by the inescapable, legally perfect noose I had expertly and meticulously tightened, Isabelle was forced to comply, her defiance crumbling into sullen, furious resignation. She moved her expensive, minimalist, coldly aesthetic furniture into our father's cluttered, memory-filled, warmly chaotic home, the jarring juxtaposition a perfect visual representation of our violent, fundamental clash of worlds and values. I, as the sole designated financial agent, provided her with a strict, meager, almost punitive budget for groceries and medical supplies, accounting for every single penny, demanding receipts for every purchase. Her luxurious, self-indulgent life of spontaneous spa days, power business lunches, and first-class international travel was over, replaced overnight by the relentless, monotonous, and emotionally draining reality of full-time, hands-on, intimate caregiving. I moved into a small, sparse, temporary rental apartment, but I made a point of conducting unannounced, random visits to monitor the situation closely, to bear witness. The schadenfreude was a bitter, unsettling pill to swallow, a dark emotion I wasn't proud of, but watching her struggle to get him to eat his pureed food or change his soiled clothes was a dark, deeply satisfying confirmation of her utter hypocrisy and complete, profound lack of preparedness for the role she had so cynically coveted on paper. 298 words. The immense, grinding, day-in day-out weight of the caretaker role began to crush Isabelle's polished spirit almost immediately. The reality of it, a brutal, unrelenting assault she was wholly unequipped to handle. The constant, unending, demeaning demands, the bathroom accidents, the food thrown in confusion, the heartbreaking, repetitive questions asked a dozen times an hour, the terrifying, sleepless nights when he would wander and shout for his own long-deceased parents, were a sustained, systematic demolition of her controlled, curated, and profoundly self-centered world. Her calls to me became less about threats and more about desperate, exhausted, pleading whimpers, the facade of the powerful executive completely gone. "He won't listen to me, Clara. He keeps asking for you. He doesn't even know who I am most of the time. He called me the maid. You have to come help. Please, I can't do this alone." I remained firm, my heart hardening into a cold, heavy stone in my chest despite the occasional, sharp pangs of guilt and pity. "This is what you fought for, Isabelle," I would reply, my voice flat and devoid of any warmth or sympathy. "This is responsibility. This is what you said I wasn't capable of handling. Now prove you are. Prove you're the responsible one." Hanging up the phone, I would feel a sharp twinge of something akin to remorse, but it was quickly, efficiently smothered by the vivid, searing, audio-recorded memory of her betrayal and her cold, gloating voice on the phone that fateful day. I watched from a calculated, emotionally detached distance as the constant, unyielding, corrosive stress eroded her polished facade, layer by fragile layer, revealing the raw, panicked human beneath. I saw her one afternoon through the kitchen window, unseen, her hair disheveled and greasy, deep, bruise-like dark circles carved under her hollow eyes, wearing stained old sweatpants that belonged to Dad as she tried and failed miserably to coax him to take his afternoon medication, her hands shaking with frustration and exhaustion. The sister who had always looked down on me with condescending pity, who had deemed my life small, unambitious, and pathetic, was now being systematically, inexorably broken by the very duties she had considered beneath her station, beneath her very notice. There was no joy in seeing it, no triumphant, gleeful thrill, only a grim, hollow, and profoundly weary sense of necessary karmic justice being served, a debt being paid in the currency of exhaustion. She was learning in the hardest, most brutal, most visceral way possible the true, immense, non-monetary cost of the legacy she had tried to steal. It was a cost that couldn't be measured in dollars and cents, but in endless exhaustion, in lost identity, in shattered vanity, and in quiet, daily, grinding despair. After 3 grueling, soul-crushing, interminable months, she finally completely and utterly broke. She came to my small, impersonal rental apartment, her face gaunt and pale as parchment, her eyes hollow and devoid of their former fiery arrogance, now just empty windows to a drained spirit. She didn't look triumphant or angry anymore. She looked utterly, completely defeated, a hollowed-out shell of the formidable woman she once was. "I can't do it anymore, Clara," she whispered, her voice a raspy, broken thing, tears of pure, unadulterated exhaustion and shame streaming down her face, cutting tracks through her makeup-less skin. "I can't. I was wrong. I'm so sorry. I don't know how you did it. I don't know how anyone does it." She then confessed everything in a ragged, unburdening, cathartic monologue, how she had deliberately, coldly sought out a lawyer known for aggressive, cutthroat estate planning, how she had carefully, patiently manipulated Dad during his brief, fleeting moments of shaky clarity, her detailed, mercenary plan to quickly flip the house for maximum profit and cut me out completely without a second thought or a single cent. She had even kept a detailed, itemized ledger of all her expenses, including takeout food and dry cleaning, which she had fully planned to bill the estate for. Her greed, I saw with chilling clarity, was as meticulous, organized, and soulless as a corporate takeover. With her full, tear-streaked, legally perfect confession recorded and witnessed by a stone-faced Mr. Davies, I offered her a single, clean, definitive way out. It was not an act of forgiveness, for that was a bridge too far, a sentiment for a future I couldn't yet envision, but a pragmatic, clinical act of finality, of closure. She would sign a legally binding, ironclad, airtight agreement, renouncing all current and future claims to our father's estate in perpetuity forever. In return, I would not press criminal charges and would release her from the torturous, soul-destroying caregiving role immediately, that very hour. She read the document, her hands shaking so violently she could barely hold the paper, her breath coming in ragged hitches, and then she signed it without a moment's hesitation, her signature a messy, defeated scrawl. Her freedom from the psychological nightmare I had constructed now infinitely more valuable to her than any potential inheritance. Watching her scrawl her name at the bottom, a testament to her surrender, I felt no sense of victory, no elation, only a profound and weary closure, like the last, heavy page of a very long, very painful, and deeply tragic book had finally been turned. The war was finally, definitively, conclusively over. With a clear heart and the bitter, draining legal battle conclusively over, I could finally, with a clean conscience and an unburdened soul, make the best, most loving decision for Dad, free from the toxic, suffocating poison of familial conflict and greed. I sold the house, now a place forever tainted by the painful, ghostly memories of betrayal and manipulation, and used the entire fund to place him in Silver Pines, a top-tier, compassionate, and professionally run memory care facility. It was not the cold, impersonal, depressing home Isabelle had so cynically and falsely warned against, but a beautiful, safe, specialized residence with trained, empathetic staff, secure, blooming gardens, and engaging, therapeutic activities tailored specifically for residents with his condition. It was safe, it was clean, it was warm, and most importantly, it was peaceful, a haven of calm. On his first day, I held his thin, papery hand in mine as he looked out at the bird feeder outside his new sun-filled window, the birds darting back and forth. He turned to me slowly and smiled, a genuine, quiet, peaceful smile that reached his eyes for the first time in years. "It's nice here, Clarabelle," he said softly, his voice a gentle rustle. And for the first time in over a year, I truly, deeply, with every fiber of my being, believed he was finally, truly, and permanently at peace. The remaining money from the estate, what would have been my entire substantial inheritance, was used to establish and endow the Albert Foundation. It was a non-profit, charitable organization dedicated to providing free legal aid, practical resources, and emotional support for families and individuals navigating the complex, heartbreaking, and often predatory world of dementia care and fighting elder financial exploitation. His legacy would no longer be a source of bitter, lasting conflict between his daughters, but a lasting, living beacon of help, hope, protection, and justice for other vulnerable families facing similar darkness and betrayal. Turning our profound, personal pain into a purposeful, healing mission was the only way I could truly, meaningfully honor the good, wise, generous, and forward-thinking man he had always been at his core. I ran the foundation's day-to-day operations with my best friend Chloe, whose unwavering, fierce support had been my only solid anchor throughout the entire, devastating storm. In this new, redemptive, and hopeful chapter, his name would stand for protection, for justice, for compassion, and for love, not for the betrayal and greed that had so nearly defined its end. I visited Dad every single day without fail, a pilgrimage of love and duty. Some days he knew me, his eyes lighting up with a flicker of clear, beautiful recognition as he called me his Clara Belle, his voice strong for a moment. Other days, he was just a quiet, contented, gentle man who enjoyed the warmth of the sunshine on his face and the chocolate chip cookies I always, without fail, brought him, his enjoyment simple and pure. But regardless of his mental state, whether he was present or adrift, he was safe. He was cared for with immense dignity, infinite patience, and professional skill by people who were not exhausted, resentful, manipulative, or emotionally invested in a legacy. I was no longer his frantic, overwhelmed, and grieving full-time caretaker. I was simply his daughter again. I could read to him from his favorite dog-eared books, hold his hand during slow, meandering walks in the fragrant garden, and love him without the crushing, unsustainable, all-consuming weight of total 24/7 responsibility. Our time together became precious, unburdened, sacred moments of simple human connection in the gentle, slow-moving, and soft-focused twilight of his life. About a year later, Mr. Davies forwarded me a brief, dispassionate, almost contemptuous email without comment. Isabelle had written to him asking in carefully worded, legalistic weasel language if there was any possible avenue, however slight or technical, to contest the funding or the legal structure of the Albert Foundation, claiming she had been under duress and psychologically coerced when she signed the sweeping settlement agreement. She had bounced back in her corporate career, it seemed, the sharp edges of her ambition re-honed, but her inherent core avarice had not diminished in the slightest. It had just been lying in wait. Mr. Davies' reply was a masterpiece of legal finality and quiet, professional threat. The matter is closed. Any further communication on this subject will be considered harassment and will be met with the immediate public release of the full litany of evidence in our possession, including the sworn, recorded confession and the financial ledger. I deleted the email without a second thought, a clean, sharp, decisive click of the mouse. Some people, I understood then with a sad final clarity, never truly change. Their core nature is fixed, a deep and immutable flaw. But their power to harm you, to disrupt your peace, to inject their toxicity into your life, can be permanently, legally, and absolutely revoked. She was a painful, closed chapter I had finally definitively closed, and I would not, under any circumstances, reread it. The real, profound victory, I came to understand slowly and with great, hard-won clarity, was not in beating my sister or in publicly humiliating her, as satisfying as that moment had been. It was in honoring my father's true, deepest, most heartfelt wishes, the ones he had made when his mind was clear, his heart was open, and his judgment was unclouded and entirely his own. He had trusted me, above all others in the world, to be his voice, his protector, his steadfast, unwavering advocate when he could no longer be his own, and in the end, despite the cost, I had been. Through the searing fire of betrayal and a war I never wanted and never asked for, I had protected him, secured his comfort, and ensured his final years were defined by peace, safety, compassionate care, and dignity, not by fear, manipulation, and cruel exploitation. That was the only inheritance that had ever truly mattered, the only one with lasting value. I had fought the brutal, ugly battle he could not fight for himself, and I had won him the dignified, gentle, loving end he so richly deserved. It was the last and greatest and most meaningful gift I could ever give him. I sit with him now, in the sunny, quiet, softly lit common room of Silver Pines, holding his frail, papery, beloved hand in mine as he dozes peacefully in his favorite, well-worn, comfortable armchair, his breathing even and calm. The legal wars are a distant, fading, almost dreamlike echo. The daunting, soul-destroying stacks of legal documents are filed away in a fireproof vault, their power spent. The all-consuming, white-hot anger has cooled, its energy dissipated, leaving behind a quiet, steady, and enduring peace that fills the spaces the fear and rage once occupied, a gentle tide. There is only the soft, rhythmic hum of a life being well and lovingly cared for, the gentle, reassuring sound of his breathing, the simple, profound warmth of his hand in mine. I learned through the searing, transformative pain that the most powerful revenge is not destruction, but redemption. I had redeemed my father's final chapter from the clutches of greed and moral bankruptcy, salvaging its meaning. In doing so, in fighting so fiercely for him, I had ultimately found my own formidable strength and my own hard-won, precious, and deeply valued peace. The love remained, strong and untarnished, shining brightly through the long, difficult struggle. This story was born from a place of deep, personal, shattering pain and profound betrayal. A wound that cuts to the very core of what family means. But it was also forged, tempered, and given meaning by the incredible, resilient, ferocious power of a daughter's love and the sheer, unyielding strength of the human spirit when pushed to its limits. If you are facing a similar heartbreaking situation with a loved one who is vulnerable or family dynamics that feel toxic, suffocating, and overwhelmingly complex, please know this, with every fiber of your being. You are not alone. Protect your loved ones and yourself by having open, honest, and courageous conversations early, long before a crisis ever strikes. Secure essential legal documents like a durable power of attorney and a living will with a reputable, trusted, and compassionate lawyer. Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it almost certainly is. That nagging feeling is your first and best defense. Seek support from communities, social workers, therapists, and professional advocates. You do not have to carry this weight by yourself. Remember, the greatest legacy we can ever fight for is not a monetary estate, but the enduring dignity, the unassailable safety, and the profound, hard-won peace of those we love. Thank you for sharing this difficult, painful, but ultimately hopeful and redemptive journey with me.